He screams at her, he beats her, he ignores her, he rapes her. With the final grin and hands outstretched, the father strangles his 6-year-old daughter, and her cry is the only sound that fills the broken silence. In that silence, the suffrage of many children is hidden. Though unnoted, child abuse is not uncommon. It is a plague, a widespread occurrence that does not discriminate. Typically more than just physical abuse, it is also sexual, and together they are emotional abuse and neglect. When intertwined, they sentence a child to cruelty while impairing healthy maturity. Among the nations, the United States holds the worst record of victims, thus making child abuse an incredibly pressing issue that will remain unresolved with ignorance and inaction. The problem is the cycle of child abuse within generations, originating from the parents. They are the primary abusers, with national statistics stating that 78.1%, or most nearly, 4 out of every 5 abusers are parents. The president of the organization Every Child Matters, Michael Petit, states around 20,000 children are killed by their families in a decade, a number 4 times the dead soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. There, a cycle of intergenerational violence launches. Abused parents potentially grow to abuse their own. Studies even show 30% of the abused become abusers compared to the 2 or 3 in a whole population. However, the causes of familial abuse need consideration, with instances such as social isolation depriving parents of support in raising children properly. Influencing behavioral instincts and causing rash judgment, it's important to realize and resolve the causes for a parent to abuse a child. To cease a cycle of abuse, it is necessary to respond to the scars of the formerly abused parents. Researchers are developing supports to address these effects, build resiliency, and prevent further trauma. These practices, such as psychotherapy and psychoeducation, provide parents a coping mechanism that helps them surpass their pains. Additionally, socially outcasted parents can join programs that help foster parenting skills as well as help new mothers. These tactics are methods for an abused parent to manage their past to prevent another generation of abuse. There is also the issue of victims suffering psychologically and physically after continual exposure to abuse. Physical difficulties are ordinarily injuries such as bruising, broken bones, or hemorrhage. However, the Administration for Children and Families states 28% of the abused endure chronic health issues like abrasive head trauma and faulty brain development. From there, the victims are shrouded in fear and mistrust that combine into depression, anxiety, or panic. In conducted studies, 80% of formerly abused 21-year-olds have at least one psychological disorder. They dissociate to avoid reminders of their nightmare, and rarely, although it does occur, they suppress their memories. For quite a while, the victims are merely just surviving. To change that survival into living, the victims must cope with their scars as formerly abused parents do. Firstly, there is therapy directed towards self-love for a victim to learn how to trust again. Group therapy especially proves to be effective for survivors to unload their feelings to others bearing the same sorrows. This goes hand in hand with TIC, or Trauma-Informed Care, which is similar to therapy with its association to reducing mental problems. Legislatively, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, known as CAPTA, provides more funding for programs and authorizes governmental research on abuse reduction and prevention. The newly installed centers give victims a larger array of suggestions to absolve their heart's troubles. Not only does child abuse deal mental repercussions, it is also gravely underreported. The 3 million reports of child maltreatment rose to 4 by 2015, according to the Children's Bureau. Subsequently, the number of involved children increased to 7 million from the initial 6.6, and deaths therefore are resultingly greater. Yet these numbers only satisfy the bare minimum. Nearly 50 to 60% of maltreatment fatalities are not even recorded. There are also many victims or caregivers that refuse to report the abuse because of fear of misunderstandings and inaccuracy. After all, it can be difficult to recognize the signs for certain forms of child abuse when some leaves no visible wounds. With continuous underreporting, child abuse is hard to address, especially since the numbers are inaccurate. The core of the solutions for underreporting is knowledge and observation towards the signs of child abuse. These red flags depend on how a child is abused. For example, signs of physical abuse include, but are not limited to, bruising, broken bones, and cigarette burns. Because clothing obscures wounds, other flags include the repetition and inexplicability of the injuries. Neglect differs, being more difficult to detect, although a child's uncleanliness and extreme hunger can be indicators. After recognizing the signs, acting on these suspicions potentially frees the child. Moreover, joining prevention programs can help spread awareness for larger populations. Sometimes, all that is needed to report and recognize ongoing child abuse is a transmittance of simple information. Child abuse is most prevalent at home, a place that should be a haven but can turn into a nightmare. The idea of anguished children does not sit comfortably in most minds, often drawing forth sympathy and stimulating a yearning to help. But an issue only reaches an answer with action. There is certainly a lot to consider when seeking resolution, but it is not necessary for everyone to become Superman, only for one to begin making choices that can eventually create a community where child abuse is no longer as recurrent. The abused abuse others. relieve the former and current victims to create a change that ends generations of child abuse.